It was 3:17 in the morning. The city of Ouagadougou slept, but in the presidential office the silence was broken by a shrill, unholy sound. The phone rang, and when that line opened, history itself seemed to lean in to listen. A voice, cold and sharp, cut through the darkness like a blade. "Captain Traoré, you have exactly 48 hours. Restore our mining contracts. Reinstate our surveillance partnerships. Reverse every decision you have made against Israeli interests. Either you surrender or you will be removed. Not with tanks, not with ballots, but with a single phone call dressed as diplomacy, carrying the weight of extortion, the arrogance of empire in a modern suit." But that night, standing alone in his office, Ibrahim Traoré did not tremble. He did not plead. He did not bow. His answer was clear as steel. "I do not negotiate with extortionists. I do not kneel before bullies, and I will not abandon my people because a foreign power commands it." The line went dead. Yet the danger was not over, for within minutes the phone rang again. The same voice, colder still. "You have 48 hours to hand over power to someone who understands cooperation. Refuse, and you will be removed, whether you like it or not." But this time, Traoré did not even wait. With conviction blazing, he repeated, "I do not negotiate. I do not surrender. I do not abandon my people." And at that very hour, while the night pressed heavy upon the capital, something shifted. Fear gave way to clarity. A storm was coming, but so was resistance. My friends, stay with me. For what began with a midnight phone call would soon ignite a fire across a continent. And in the next few minutes, you will witness how 48 hours became the turning point of African history. The hour was heavy. The walls of the palace seemed to listen. After the second call, Ibrahim Traoré stood alone in the dim light, not as a frightened man, but as a leader touched by destiny. He had been given a deadline, a command from afar: submit or be erased. But instead of fear, he felt clarity, and with that clarity came action. He reached for another phone, not to beg, but to summon. His security chief, startled from sleep, answered groggily, "Sir, it is 3 in the morning." But Traoré's voice was firm. "I don't care what time it is. Assemble the council. We face not a contract dispute, but a threat against our very sovereignty." Within an hour, the most trusted figures of the Republic gathered in the crisis room. The Minister of Defense, the head of intelligence, the advisor on foreign affairs. They sat in silence as the president placed a small recorder on the table. Then came the chilling sound of the ultimatum replayed, the demands, the veiled threats, the arrogance. When the recordings ended, no one spoke. The silence was heavy, sacred, like a church before the sermon begins. Then the defense minister broke it. "This is not about contracts. This is regime change. This is the way powers prepare before they strike." The head of intelligence nodded, his face grave. "We have seen unusual patterns for weeks. Foreign satellites watching our skies, cyber probes in our systems, money flowing into shadowy accounts. They were preparing, sir, preparing for your removal." The foreign advisor, his voice low but steady, named the dreadful option aloud. "You could resign. Hand power to a man acceptable to them. Perhaps they let you leave the country alive." But Traoré did not even hesitate. "Never," he said, his words cutting like thunder. "What else?" The defense minister answered bluntly. "Then we stand firm. But this is not a war of tanks or rifles. This is a war of economics, of information, of cyber sabotage, of diplomacy. They will not only strike at you, they will strike at the very idea of an independent Africa." Traoré rose from his chair and walked to a great map of his nation on the wall. A landlocked country, 22 million souls. No nuclear arsenal, no massive army, only resolve. He placed his hand upon that map and declared, "Sometimes refusing is enough, and tonight we refuse." He turned back to the table, lifted the secure phone, and began a chain of calls that would echo far beyond Burkina Faso. First call, Caracas. "President Maduro, Israel has demanded I surrender. I refuse. I call not for help, but to inform you, we will not kneel." Second call, Tehran. "Connect me with the supreme leader. Israel wants me to step down. Tell them this. I will not." Third call, Moscow. "Put me through to President Putin. They call this cooperation, but it is an ultimatum. I name it what it is, regime change." Fourth call, Beijing. "Priority line to President Xi. Western investment may vanish tomorrow. I need economic support to keep this nation breathing free." One by one, the cabinet watched in silence as their president refused to bow, building alliances not with chains, but with choice. They realized they were witnessing not weakness, but history. Then came a whisper from the foreign advisor, "Sir, this may make us enemies of the entire West." Traoré's reply was steady as stone. "We already are. From the moment I refused to sell our resources on their terms, we became their enemy. Better to be hated for standing than loved for kneeling." As the 20th hour of the ultimatum approached, a new reality had been set in motion. Defensive plans were drafted, allies were informed, but one element remained, the most crucial element of all, the people. For no leader can survive an ultimatum without his people standing behind him. And so, as dawn prepared to break over Ouagadougou, the question hung heavy in the air. When the threat becomes public, will the people stand? Or will they scatter? Stay with me, because what happened next would shake not only a nation, but an entire continent. For the ultimatum that was meant to isolate him would soon ignite a fire that no foreign power could contain. When the 20th hour passed, the ultimatum was no longer a secret whispered in dark rooms. It became a broadcast. It spilled onto the airwaves, carried not by the government, but by Israel itself, boasting of its pressure. They thought the leak would frighten. They thought the people would break. But arrogance always miscalculates. By dawn, Ouagadougou was awake. Every station, from the largest network to the humblest village radio, repeated the same shocking sentence. The Prime Minister of Israel has given President Traoré 48 hours to restore contracts or surrender power. What they expected was panic. What they received was fury. By noon, the streets around the presidential palace were no longer quiet. Crowds poured in, men and women, young and old, carrying signs painted through the night. Their words were simple, defiant, unforgettable. Traoré stays. Our minerals are not Israeli property. No more foreign espionage. Africa does not take orders. And some signs carried poetry. 48 hours. Try 48 years. We are not a colony. We are not vassals. We are Burkina Faso. The streets spoke, and their echo crossed borders. But while the people roared outside, the pressure inside sharpened. At the 30th hour, the phone rang again. The same voice, colder, harder. "Captain Traoré, you have 18 hours left. Your pride will bring suffering. Use your time wisely." But this time, the president was ready. He spoke calmly. "Prime Minister Netanyahu, allow me to save you some time. I will not resign. I will not surrender. I will not abandon my people. You think the crowd will not protect me? You are mistaken. The crowd is not my shield. The crowd is what is coming. 22 million Burkinabe who now know you tried to choose their president." The line went silent. The arrogance was wounded. Yet the assault had only just begun. At the 36th hour, the storm broke in full. The head of intelligence rushed into the president's office. "Sir, we are under attack." Banking platforms collapsed. The national grid flickered and faltered. Communications jammed. But worse than wires and circuits was the invisible war, the war of lies. Deepfake videos flooded social media. False images of ministers fleeing. Fake statements of resignation. Forged bank documents with Traoré's name. The goal was clear, to convince the nation that its leader had already fallen. But Burkina was not defenseless. Plans had been drawn in the night. When the banks fell, backup networks activated. When electricity was sabotaged, generators kept essential services alive. When communication lines cracked, encrypted channels carried the truth. And when the lies spread, a team of watchmen dismantled them in minutes. Every fake video, every forged paper, exposed. Yet the attack was deeper still. Western headlines carried the same chorus. Authoritarianism on the rise in Africa. Democracy backsliding in West Africa. The danger of anti-Western populists. It was not simply an attack on Traoré. It was an attack on the very possibility of African sovereignty. To make one man illegitimate was to declare all resistance illegitimate. But arrogance has a way of uniting the very people it seeks to divide. At the 40th hour, the first calls began to arrive. From Mali, "If they remove you, they remove us all. We are preparing a continental response." From Niger, "Our parliament has passed a resolution condemning interference. If they touch you, African sanctions will fall." From Ghana, "We have called for an urgent session of the African Union. Any attack on Burkina Faso is an attack on Africa." From Chad, "Our military is on alert. If they intervene, our defense pact is activated." What began as an ultimatum to one leader was now becoming a rallying cry for a continent. At the 42nd hour, something unthinkable had crystallized. The very ultimatum meant to isolate Traoré had unified Africa. Leaders who once stood apart now declared, "If you strike him, you strike us." And so, at the 45th hour, the phone rang one more time. But the voice had changed. No longer sharp, no longer commanding. It was measured, searching, almost pleading. "Captain Traoré, perhaps we can find a solution. Your resignation is not necessary if you restore our commercial partnerships." But by then, the tide had turned. Allies had rallied. The people had risen. The continent had awakened. Stay with me, because the final hours, the last 3 hours, would decide not only the fate of one president, but the birth of a new chapter for Africa. At the 48th hour, the sun sank low over Ouagadougou. The city held its breath. The ultimatum expired. The deadline ended. The world waited for collapse. But instead, something else happened. The doors of the presidential palace opened, and Ibrahim Traoré walked out, not hidden, not guarded by tanks, but standing tall, his face bare to the crowd. No papers in his hand, no teleprompter before him. Only his voice, his body, and the thunder of a people gathered as far as the eye could see. He lifted his hand for silence. The noise subsided into a holy hush, and then he spoke. 48 hours ago, the Prime Minister of Israel ordered me to surrender or see this nation broken. He thought he could remove an African president with a phone call. Tonight, I tell you, I am still here. You are still free. And Burkina Faso still belongs to the Burkinabe. The crowd erupted. A wave of sound so fierce it shook the windows of the palace. But Traoré raised his hand again. This was not a night for celebration alone. It was a night for clarity. They told us we had two choices, submit or be removed. But we have chosen a third way, resistance. Not only against Israel's pressure, but against the belief that any foreign power has the right to choose our leaders, control our resources, or dictate our destiny. And with those words, the country changed. Not just the country, the continent. In the days that followed, Burkina Faso became a mirror. Across Africa, leaders watched. Across Africa, citizens whispered. They said no, and they survived. Within a week, 3 nations announced reviews of every contract signed under foreign duress. Within a month, the African Union passed a resolution condemning all ultimatums aimed at democratically elected governments. The message was unshakable. Interference disguised as diplomacy would not be tolerated. 6 months later came something greater. The birth of the Ouagadougou Protocol, signed by 23 nations in its first week. It declared that any attempt at regime change, whether by economic strangulation, cyber assault, media distortion, or political manipulation, would be treated as an attack upon the whole continent. It was not militarism. It was diplomacy with a backbone. Burkina Faso, a small nation without nuclear arms, without vast riches, without a mighty army, had become a symbol. The land that resisted 48 hours became the moral compass of Africa, and the impact rippled outward. Analysts in Western capitals predicted isolation, poverty, collapse. But new partners arrived instead, from Latin America, from Asia, from even independent voices within Europe, nations willing to trade without shackles. The finance minister of Burkina Faso, standing firm, spoke words that would echo in homes across the land. It is better to walk slowly with dignity than to run fast in humiliation. What we lose in comfort, we gain in respect, and that respect is beginning to pay dividends. Beyond numbers, beyond investment, a deeper change was born, the change of spirit. Citizens spoke of dignity with open pride. Children in classrooms learned a new vocabulary, sovereignty. Bus drivers played recordings of the balcony speech. Grandmothers whispered, "This time we did not sell out. This time we stood firm." The victory was collective. It was not only the president who resisted, but the people themselves. And across the continent, movements sprang forth. In Accra, students declared a day called 48 Hours that changed everything. In Nairobi, protesters marched with banners. African democracy is not for sale. In Cape Town, murals appeared of Traoré holding the phone, hanging up with quiet defiance. Africa had remembered its voice. But dignity carries a price. Sanctions froze accounts. Technical aid was delayed. Projects stalled. Western media declared the nation reckless, autarkic, doomed. Yet the people endured, and in their endurance, they discovered strength. For as the minister said, it is better to walk slowly with dignity than to run in humiliation. Step by step, new investments came. Step by step, South-South collaboration flourished. Step by step, Burkina Faso crafted a foreign policy free from foreign tutors whispering in the room. And so, as the weeks turned into months, the question began to stir far beyond Africa. In universities, in markets, in parliaments, men and women asked, what happens when Africa says no and survives? That question, so simple yet so powerful, was enough to trouble empires and inspire the oppressed. For the precedent had been set. A leader, a people, a continent had chosen another way. Not extinction, but ignition. And, my friends, what followed would spread far beyond Burkina Faso, reaching even the great powers of the world. Stay with me, for the story now turns toward America, toward Europe, toward the watching world. And the question is no longer whether one man can resist, but whether an entire continent can rise. The winds of consequence do not stop at borders. What ignited in Ouagadougou soon echoed in Washington, Paris, London, Berlin. Officially, Western governments kept their silence, but their newspapers, their anchors, their headlines spoke with a single tongue. Authoritarianism reborn in Africa. Populist danger threatens stability. Burkina Faso, brave or reckless. The narrative was clear. This was not about sovereignty, they said, but about instability. It was not about dignity, but about danger. They sought to redefine resistance as rebellion, to brand sovereignty as sin. Yet words have power, but so does truth. And the truth was visible to the world. A small nation battered but unbroken, a president still standing after the clock struck 48. From Caracas came the first open hand, political asylum if ever needed. From Tehran came cyber specialists offering to shield the nation's networks. From Moscow came advisors to reinforce the president's security. From Beijing came economic lifelines, fresh investment, new roads, new energy. The world was dividing, not by East and West, not by religion or race, but by principle. Those who believed in domination stood on one side. Those who believed in dignity stood on the other. And then an unexpected figure arrived. She was not a politician, not a general. She was a journalist. An American woman, Jewish by heritage, named Sarah Cohen. She came not with demands, but with conscience. Sitting across from President Traoré, she spoke quietly but firmly. What Prime Minister Netanyahu did, that is not Judaism. Those are not our values. That was colonialism wearing a Star of David. She opened her laptop, and there she revealed a petition. More than 50,000 Jewish voices across the globe. Rabbis from Brooklyn, Holocaust survivors in Montreal, peace activists in Tel Aviv, all united in one declaration. We condemn the ultimatum. We defend Burkina Faso's right to choose its own path. And then she said words that pierced the heart of history. We know what it means when foreign powers tell you that you do not belong in your own home. We have lived that for centuries. What Israel tried to do to you brings us shame. That moment mattered. It showed the world that this was not people against people, not Jew against African, not West against South. It was model against model, future against past, dignity against domination. And so, the question spread wider. If Burkina Faso could resist and remain standing, what might happen if all Africa spoke with one voice? Stay with me, because the final act is still to come. The balcony speech was not the end. The United Nations awaited, and there, before the eyes of every nation, the defiance of 48 hours would become the declaration of a new world. 3 years passed. The night of the ultimatum had become legend, told in classrooms, painted on murals, sung in market stalls. Yet its true measure came not in songs, but in the halls of the United Nations. President Ibrahim Traoré walked to the podium of the General Assembly. He did not carry notes. He did not lean on paper. He spoke with the memory of those 48 hours burning in his chest. 3 years ago, he began. A foreign leader gave me 48 hours to choose between my office and my principles. He believed he could topple an African president with a phone call. Today, I stand before you to say he was wrong. The chamber erupted in applause, but Traoré raised his hand for silence. His next words mattered more than clapping. This story is not only about Burkina Faso. It is about the right of all peoples to decide their own destiny without threats, without coercion, without blackmail. No nation has the right to dictate the future of another, whether by army, by bank, or by embassy. He turned toward the Israeli delegation, not with hate, not with malice, with firmness. We are not anti-Israel. We are not anti-West. We are pro-dignity. We are pro-sovereignty. We are profoundly anti-ultimatum. In that moment, more than 2/3 of the assembly rose to their feet. Africa had spoken, but so had the global South. And the world could no longer pretend not to hear. Back home, the momentum grew. The African Monetary Union accelerated plans for a continental currency. The African Space Consortium launched its first satellite, declaring, "Why depend on foreign surveillance when we can watch our own skies?" Fiber optic cables were laid from Dar to Kigali, from Luanda to Addis Ababa, an African internet network free from Western servers. And in Kampala, Uganda, a new institution opened its doors, the African Leadership Academy. There, young men and women studied courses never imagined before: diplomacy with a backbone, economic sovereignty, narrative defense, and the most popular of all, the 48-hour protocol. In that classroom, students traced every decision of the crisis, every call, every alliance, every word. They learned that independence is not declared, it is defended, not once but every day. From that academy rose a new generation, ministers, parliamentarians, activists, who spoke with one refrain: Africa negotiates, but Africa does not kneel. And so the question spread beyond Africa, beyond the South, beyond the chamber of the UN. What happens when the powerless refuse to bow and remain standing? Stay with me, because the story is not finished. The deadline passed, but the era it began is only just unfolding. And in that unfolding, the shadow of ultimatum has given way to the dawn of resistance. The deadline has long passed, but its echo still lingers. What was meant to be a surrender became a stand. What was designed to be humiliation became history. And today, that history bears a name: Traoré's failed ultimatum to Israel. For in those 2 days, the arrogance of empire was unmasked, and the strength of dignity was revealed. 48 hours were given, 48 hours were endured, but those 48 hours transformed into something greater, 48 hours that changed Africa. And let us be clear, this is not a tale frozen in time. It is a lesson. It is a mirror. For in our own lives, we too will face ultimatums, not from foreign powers perhaps, but from fear, from compromise, from voices that tell us to bow when our hearts say stand. In those moments, the question will come: will you yield or will you hold your ground? Traoré's answer was simple. He chose dignity over comfort, sovereignty over submission. And because of that choice, his nation rose, his continent stirred, and the world took notice. That, my friends, is the true legacy of Traoré's failed ultimatum to Israel. So I ask you now, what word will you choose to summarize this moment? Will it be never again? Will it be Africa ascendant? Or will it be something more personal, a word that carries your own story of resistance? Leave your answer in the comments. For history is not only written by presidents, it is written by people like you, bearing witness, speaking truth. And if this story has stirred something deep in you, do not let it fade. Subscribe now, share this message, and stand with us. Because for too many years, they spoke for us. Now it is our turn to speak for ourselves. This is not the end. This is the beginning. The phone rang, the ultimatum was given, but the answer still resounds across generations. We do not kneel. We do not surrender. We endure, and we rise.